Good morning. I cannot really see you. Let me try this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Ni hao. Thank you. So let's get into it directly. Short introduction of myself. I started working on those open source projects at the dates you see here as a developer. So from what the timeline you've seen already, I'm one of those old timers of people who actually got into it before the internet was what it is now. Also did my business, my whole career. Sorry about that. Okay. Did my whole career on open source. You can see that you can see that my original starting with open source was while at uni. So the wording I just heard, and by the way, the translation effort in the software is great. I'm just amazed how good it works. And I saw you talking about getting the students doing more. This is exactly how I came into open source during uni time. Then I did some work, and then in 2000 started my own company that only did open source services, mostly support. We were acquired in 21, acquired again in 22, so we became part of a big American company. Didn't really work out, so now I'm out of it, working as an advisor, mentor, semi-retired, whatever you want to call it. Let me start with this article that was recently published on, I think it was ACM, some publication system, whatever. I don't necessarily agree with everything it says, but there are some interesting points in there. The one I don't understand is this reference, Windows Vista, because Linux is much older. But anyway, the part that's really important when we're talking about business models, which is what I'm supposed to talk about, is that people focused on money did not really get open source back then. And with focused on money, it doesn't really mean people running a company, but people whose job is money, like the classical CFO in whatever big company you have. What I also and strongly agree with is this one. Open source by itself is not a business model. It's something you can use, something you should use, because it gives your business a lot of opportunities. But it itself isn't a business model. It doesn't, anything that you do doesn't sell well just because you open source it. The business models in open source, though, have changed over the years. And they have to pivot again and again and again. This is just how industry works, especially the software industry that invents itself always over and over again. So let's see where we are and what we can learn from the past for the future. Let's start at the beginning. This is actually University of Berkeley, the clock tower, I think. It's the university where Postgres was originally developed. Most open source software has some school, some university where it began. I could have used a picture of MIT for GNU software, University of Helsinki for Linux, Purdue for Debian, whatever you want. All those old open source projects have a school behind it, simply where it started. But how about the business side? I'm not sure if everyone realizes these four. Let's start on the left. This is Professor Stonebreaker. He is the one starting Postgres. They did have a history of branching out companies, and they did for Postgres. More about that a little while. I doubt they ever thought about creating open source businesses. This is Richard Stallman, the founder of the GNU project. I'm not sure what he thinks about business at all. Linus Torvalds, and this here is Ian Murdoch, the guy who started Debian. Unfortunately, Ian passed away several years ago, but both of them never said anything about business models, and I talked to them in person quite often. We never talked about that. They didn't have any business ideas when they started the project. So when open source became a thing, the first offering as a business was probably like a CD set to help people install their Linux software. However, since we're talking business here and probably business to business, that's a different way of monetizing open source. So what were the first business that were helping business? It's probably something to help simplifying or taking over some tasks, or use open source to build something, build their product that had nothing to do with open source, which created a lot of confusion. I remember a time when you could buy, well, in my country, I'm German, when you could buy a firewall that was nothing but a Linux system with just configured whatever the table system was named then, for more than 100,000 Deutschmark. So creating the system, buying the hardware was a few thousand, and they had a margin of like 90%, because nobody knows or knew how it worked. The other one that really kept to my mind is visiting a company that did an ERP system, and the CEO told me, oh, we are open source now. Oh, that's great, open source needs an ERP system. So I started asking, because I haven't heard of it. Yeah, it turns out the open source part was they compiled it to run on Linux. They were selling the closed source software that run on Linux, that's it. Let's have a quick look at the three projects we mentioned. Different licenses, already heard about that a bit. Postgres became a company called Illustra. Illustra became Informix, or well, was acquired by, Informix was acquired by IBM. So essentially what you see in DB2 nowadays, at least parts of it, has Postgres sources. Debian became the base of, well, according to DistroWatch, 126 other distributions. Ubuntu is probably the most well-known. And hardware is commodity, so Linux runs like everywhere. Nowadays, I just had to buy a new laptop because the other one broke. You don't have to check the web and find out which laptop might work with Linux and which doesn't. They just work. Out of the box, you install it, that's it. But back to business models. The first and the easiest business model is obviously services. It's easy to set up a service company. It's rather risk-free, and it doesn't need a lot of funding to start with. Obviously, you can also start big. You can raise a lot of money and then hire all the people you know that have any idea about the topic, and then look for some customers, which actually is what one American company did in late 90s. No surprise, they went bust. That's not the way to do it, hire all the people without any work for them. But back then, it was an easy setup because most people didn't know anything, so if you could set up a Linux system, you could apply for a job there. And a lot of companies were looking for help because a lot of companies noticed, I can use those Linux systems to run basic needs for my infrastructure. But they also needed to develop their own talent. This is one of my preferred slides, actually. It has nothing to do with business models, well, not directly. It's about training offerings, right? Because we all need to train, and we all need to train the next generation. We need to train the next generation of talent, essentially. And we want to certify them. We want to make sure that you can see they know what they're doing. As the trainee, you want to have something to prove when you're applying for a job that you know what you're doing. just be careful about those offerings. There are a lot of good ones out there, but my personal history involves a little bit work on ISO 9000 series certifications. And this is where that example comes from. So you can build your life vest out of concrete and get it ISO certified under those 9000 whatever. Because the whole process, or it's the process it's certified. It's not the usability of the product. And the same holds for a lot of certifications we've seen over the years in open source. And actually, and that's the thing that really gets me every time, it's easier to get a concrete life vest certified than the real one, because you don't have to worry about a return process. If the concrete one is used once, it's gone. Nobody will return it. We've seen a bit about licenses already, and I assume that most people here know about it. This is about the product side, essentially. It looks like a kind of complicated when you get started with open source. But for people who are working in this area, it's not. There are some minor details that have legal challenges, but more or less it's well understood. And companies throughout the whole globe have thrived in this ecosystem, one way or the other. And nowadays it's the base of the whole economy. It's not just IT. When we're talking about a lot of IT, a lot of big ideas and big features that IT needs and should have, but there is no company that doesn't use open source anymore. And what fascinates me walking around here and in Beijing yesterday is the amount of great electrical cars I see here that I've never seen in Europe. I would love to have that option, all those cars. And essentially the electrical car nowadays is software built into a car, and you buy the software, you buy the better software solution. But by having all this available, open source became a selling point. Obviously, companies are still trying to lock in customers. Companies want to protect their business, which is fine. One of the approaches is open core. And this is one of the ones, is one that you have to be very careful with. If it's a real open core, where most of the feature is outside the core and only the core is open, it's a real tricky business. Did anyone ever work with HP OpenMail, later known as Calyx? I remember when they open sourced it, they did it in open core, and the core was pretty much useless. You had to write your own clients to even access the core. The official clients were all closed source, so no way to use it. The premium features are part of the open or the closed source offering is fine if the core is a product in itself. So, classic example, let's stick with Postgres. You have the database and you have an add-on for some security measures because you have high security environment. That cannot be open source because then everyone else would know how it works. Absolutely fine, but not if the core hasn't any functionality. What happens if companies do that, we have seen over the years in Enterprise DB Postgres. When I was still running Creditive, we had more migrations from EDB to Postgres than from any other database, interesting enough. The other option is dual licensing, where the same software has two licenses. One is open source and the other one is for commercial use. It's a great idea in theory. In practice, it does prevent creating a community. You can have a user community, no big deal, but you cannot have a developer community because then you cannot dual license. MySQL is the prime example, especially for me as a person, because when I got into database, I got my PhD in databases, I wanted to contribute to some database, and I looked at MySQL first. But they literally told me, yeah, you can send in patches, but we are not going to accept your patches. If we like them, we will redevelop them. I was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. So that brought me to Postgres. And then came the cloud, or well, in this picture, the clouds in plural. The calm before the storm. The cloud changed everything. And why? Well, let's go into the technology, or let's start with the technology and see which effect it had on open source. Originally, most of what we now see as cloud was virtualization. Even further back, there was a lot of proprietary solutions, especially in private cloud environments. But then when the public cloud started, a lot of it was open source. I have no idea, and that'd be interesting to learn how the Chinese providers do it, but I know how the American providers do it, and 2 of the big 3 were using open source software from the get-go. There was no proprietary software used. But with the current development in the US, people see that it's not exactly the wisest thing to do, have everything on American systems. So we see a lot of people, at least in Europe, moving out of the public cloud and with the big 3 American providers again. And we see a lot of them saying, we want to have our own environment. So there are a lot of migrations from VMware to Proxmox and OpenStack, and even the old OpenStack solution has new life. But this is for virtualization. What we nowadays see in cloud deployments is mostly containers. I'm not sure if anyone does any software without using containers. And containers is a prime example because all the providers collaborate on the part of the software that doesn't give them a competitive advantage. Some of the technology that's used, especially Kubernetes here, has no similar offering in proprietary source. It's just open source. And I'm not sure if anyone here ever or would try anything with containers without using an open source stack to deploy them. Or in other words, open source, when it comes to infrastructure, has become the norm, not the exception. And then we go to the Internet of Things and edge computing. It's quite an interesting to research that market because I tried to find out what the percentage of open source is in IoT operating systems. It turns out all the lists I could find excluded Linux systems because otherwise all the numbers were too small. Linux owns way over 90% of the IoT market. And of the rest, most of them were open source too. Edge computing, similar thing. Well, technically edge computing is nothing but cloud computing, but away from the centralizing to the data center, again to decentralizing to your own data center. But the technology is the same. You're still seeing containers run on Kubernetes and so on. So that's the part of the technology, but not that the technology has changed. Business approaches have to be adjusted too, to the cloud in particular. So originally, people were thinking, well, the cloud takes away the need for services. I've been to a think tank like 15 years ago, before those American cloud offerings were really public. And I was sitting at a round table with one of the product managers from Microsoft. Oh, wait, that's not him. I'll go back to the product manager from Microsoft a little bit later. At the same discussion, we were talking about their offering, but at the same discussion, the guy sitting right next to me, I don't remember his name, turned around, looked me in the eye and said, oh, I'm sorry for you guys. I said, why? Because he is going to take away your business. Turns out it was completely wrong. It's just that the questions asked by our customers changed. The top question before the cloud was something like, how do I set up backup? The top question afterwards was, how to attune the performance of my cloud installation, my database installation. The cloud providers cannot replace the admins. So all of you who are working in database administration, your cloud provider cannot take your job because they don't go into the system. They claim to be fully managed software, but their understanding of fully managed software is not the user's understanding. Fully managed means the backup is ready and available, but it doesn't mean somebody is available to fix your screwed up data. The traditional cloud business was compute, storage, and network. And technically, it's still how they make money. But it makes sense for the cloud providers to offer software on top, because when you use the software, even if they don't make much money from the software, you need more compute, storage, and network. So they want to have software as a service solutions. That means they can go to whatever software vendor and have their software run, or they can use open source software and put it onto their system, meaning they can charge the same thing and get even more out of it because the open source software doesn't cost that much, at least not in licenses and subscriptions. It does make a difference also for the company developing the software. This is like a chart showing company valuations, especially when you go into public companies, it's fairly easy to get those numbers. Services have long been 2 at most. I mean, I've seen services companies valued at 0.8. If you have a lot of recurring business, it might go to 3. Software usually goes at about 5. All the software as a service companies you find out there, they are at like 10. And it's fairly easy to make this move for the company. It's difficult to make that move because services and software companies are completely different. So what happens is, or what happened, software providers were in a gold rush, or still are. Everyone wants to sell their software as a service because that's how they make all the money. I think this slogan is not exactly old, it is not new, wasn't coined by me. The people who made most money in any gold rush in the world were those people who sold shovels or whatever else you need to get the gold. And the same is what's happening here. The hyperscalers make money by selling, as we said, compute, storage, network, independent of the software they use. So for them, getting as much software as possible on their system makes an awful lot of sense. And it makes even more sense when it's open source. So from the business perspective, it's an easy entry, software as a service that is. The users start small and they scale with, the software scales with their businesses. Third-party software is different. I mean, I'm not going to read the slide. You can read that even afterwards. It's just naming a few reasons. Definitely, using open software is much easier than using proprietary software there. Now, what happened is the hyperscalers that did offer, still offering, solutions based on commercial open source software, and they are still offering software that's based on community software. What happens if the software company, let it be an open source company, but if that software company has only one product and the community behind that product is only that one company? And it's kind of interesting. The open source way of solving the issue would be to collaborate. The usual business reaction, again, we're talking about people on the business side, not on the technical side, people who don't understand open source, unfortunately, is to make sure that your competitor cannot use your IP. So lately we've seen a lot of license changes. Elasticsearch, Terraform, Redis, I don't know which way that's. For exactly that reason. And what then happens is the open source community forks the software and takes the older version and makes it a new one, makes a new project. The classical one is Elasticsearch to OpenSearch. Now we have an open source project that has the same technology. Not everything gets forked, fair enough, but when it doesn't, it's probably because there was no demand. How do companies react to that? I mean, most of them have to live with it. Elasticsearch actually reverted their decision and now want to be an open source company again. Some other companies start the classical fear, uncertainty, and doubt way, just to try telling the world that the open source model doesn't work, which it's not working anymore because people know too much about open source. But there is something going on, let's put it like that. And now back to the guy from Microsoft, the product manager. This was his statement. The most open cloud wins. Keep in mind, he made that statement before they went public with their cloud offering. And I think the same holds for everyone, for every cloud provider in this world. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. You have to be open. You have to be able to run whatever your clients want. And even in a Microsoft cloud, most of the VMs running are non-Microsoft. They have more Linux systems than Windows systems running. Which makes sense. I mean, we're all in open source, more or less. We know why the Linux system is advantageous. So the way companies try to protect their open source software can actually create more open source by forking the things. The ecosystem actually grows. There's no guarantee that it works that way, but mostly it does. And again, it tells you, do what your business needs, but do it with open source. Use the advantages of open source for whatever business you do. If it's a database, that's easy. We are talking about database the whole 2 days. But even if it's something else, if the database is used to build whatever, let's stick with a car. You build a car, you build software on the car. Use the advantages you have. You can collaborate with others, and you can still have your selling points by having a better user interface, better usability experience, better, I don't know what you need. In the car example, it's probably better efficiency in your motors and so on. So you don't sell by competing with your competition on something that's commodity. Just one word about community. All the forking and the development we see on the business side, there are risks for communities too, obviously. Business who take over a project and push everyone aside could also shut it down. And I have to admit, I don't have a real life example. I thought about that a bit, but I don't know one. And I don't see an advantage for the company. Most people were expecting something like this to happen when Oracle acquired MySQL, but it didn't. They still used MySQL, and I remember meeting a client who was using MySQL at the time, and we were talking about them migrating to Postgres, and he told me that the Oracle salespeople came in and told him that MySQL, the Oracle product, was crap and he should migrate to Oracle. So yes, thank you Oracle, you got me that business. But most of the time, anything like that will damage the company itself. The bigger risk, of course, is that business does not put much effort into it, does not really contribute, and the open source project just dies down and loses contributors. But it has happened all over all those years, all those projects. We win contributors, we lose contributors, and some projects die down. It's just the way the system works. And by that, it's time for me to finish my rant. Hopefully, some of the information was helpful. And my last try in Chinese, 谢谢.